So if Sainsmart really listened to all of their customers' feedback, well, let's find out with this review. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of James Dean Designs. If you're new to the channel, love CNC or laser, then make sure you hit that subscribe button down there in the corner. It literally takes a second and you're going to get all the latest tips, tricks, tutorials and reviews. Now in today's episode, we are reviewing the Sainsmart Genmitsu PROVerXl 6050 Plus, and I am genuinely excited to be reviewing this machine. The reason for this is the machine directly behind me is its predecessor, the PROVerXl 4030, or which then became a 6060. Now this was one of the first larger machines I ever got to review and I absolutely loved it, but there were some flaws in the design and people did feed that back to Sainsmart. I'll also point out that in this video I am just focusing on the PROVerXl 6050 Plus. I'm not going to do a comparison with its predecessor. I'm going to save that for another video in the future. So let's do a quick rundown of some of the listed numbers for this machine, and as always I'll start with the work area. Now as the machine name suggests, 6050, it is 600mm wide and 500mm deep on the working area. The travel or the Z-axis can do 115mm. Next we'll move on to the footprint. Now on the Sainsmart website at the time of making this video, their measurements are slightly different. They always seem to forget little things like the knobs on the end of these stepper motors or the drag chains when they overhang at the end. So the actual measurements for the footprint of this machine is 1060 wide, 930 deep and 650 high. So that's basically the size you will need if you are building an enclosure. Obviously you'll want to allow a little bit extra around the edge just for movement and travel and general maintenance. Now the frame of the entire machine is made up of a mixture of aluminium and steel, so everything is extremely solid, minimal flex going throughout everything. Even the board itself is a composition between MDF and aluminium. The base of the aluminium board is quite thick, it is 5mm, so minimises the amount of deflection you're going to get in the middle of the bed. The bed is also made up in sections which accommodate T-tracks, so you can put your clamps in very easy or hold something like a vice down, again quite simple because of the tracks that are in place. All of the axes run on single lead screws and are driven by NEMA 23 stepper motors. Now these are very large NEMA 23 motors. They have a 4.2 amp rating and a 3.1 torque rating. Now what that basically means is this is going to drive any type of spindle you want to put on this. So if you want to upgrade the spindle to a router, to a 1.5, 2.5 kilowatt water coil, for example, it will drive them. These are very strong motors. The X and Y axis are also running on linear rails just to ensure it has more rigidity and also that it runs extremely smooth, with dual 15mm linear rails on the X axis and dual 20mm linear rails on the Y axis. And the Z axis inside here has two large bearing rods to minimize the amount of play you're going to get within the Z assembly. Every axis also has dual limit switches as a great safety feature just to make sure you don't drive the machine too far. So let's quickly talk about the 300 watt spindle. Obviously look at the size of that compared to the Z assembly. It is clearly underpowered for the capabilities of this machine. However, there are a couple of reasons the manufacturers do this. Well, the first is to give you a complete package out of the box, so you can technically get started machining as soon as everything is set up. You don't need to wait for an additional item to arrive to begin doing things with the machine. The second is that they don't actually cost a huge amount, so it doesn't really impact the overall cost of the machine too much, so therefore it allows you to buy whatever you want on top to upgrade this. And to be honest, most people buying this machine are already going to have in mind that they want a router, that they want a spindle to drop into this, and that is obviously your personal choice. Now don't be underwhelmed that it is just a 300 watt spindle. This is about the third or fourth machine I've reviewed with a spindle of this size, and it is more than capable of doing most of the things that people need it to do, such as it will machine all the different types of wood that you can throw at it. It can do your different types of plastics, composites, acrylics. It can even do different types of metal. This will machine aluminium, it will machine brass. So whilst it is just a 300 watt spindle, it will be more than enough to get most people started on day one once they've got this machine set up. The collet on the end of the spindle is a standard ER11 collet that will take 1/8 bits. You can use 1/4 inch bits as well, but you will need a 1/4 inch insert to be able to place in that, which can be purchased cheaply off places such as Amazon. But they also provide you with a 65mm spindle mount, so this will take your average Makita Bauer router. It will also take something like a 1.5 spindle. So again, it is providing you the option to upgrade this machine should you want to. They have also gone to the extent of trying to hide as much of the moving parts as possible. So you will see there is an extra guard on the front here to protect the linear rails and the lead screw. The drive is all underneath the bed on the bottom, again to stop the dust being able to get to it, and a similar thing with the Z assembly. It is mainly covered to stop any dust getting in there and just keeping everything running as smooth as possible. The control box is also a new design. We can see some of the functions along the front here, such as the pause and resume buttons. We also have an emergency stop going on, as well as the dial for the speed control. It also has the available ports to take an offline controller, which can be plugged in at the front, or you can connect a laser to this as well, which can be connected at the back. One simple feature that I actually love about this is they've really thought ahead. The wiring for the laser is already within the wiring loom itself. Now on previous machines, what you have to do is run a new wire for the laser, but this is already in place, so you can literally just take the spindle out, drop the laser in, and you're good to go without doing any additional wiring. As with all Sainsmart machines, assembly of this machine is pretty simple. A lot of components come pre-built, so it's mainly just about attaching the different accessories like the bed, the cable, drag chains, those type of things. You're probably talking somewhere between half an hour to an hour to fully assemble it. And because it's a Gerbil based machine, it is going to run on all your common Gerbil based software, such as it will use Easel, it can use Carveco, it can use Vectric, you can use UGS, Candle, OpenBuilds to run it. So you've got a wide variety of options depending on what you want to do with this machine. It is listed as having a top speed of 2000mm per minute. Now these are just the default settings when the machine arrives. I've already had this up to 3000mm per minute, and it can possibly go faster than that. The price of this machine comes in just under $1,800 at $1,799, or about 1,650 British pounds. Now before you ask it, I will ask it. Why have Sainsmart gone with lead screws over ball screws? Well, my honest guess at this is to keep the cost as low as possible. Obviously this machine is $1,800. Now if you put ball screws on this, you're probably going to take it to at least the $2,000 mark, if not over. And in terms of the market that this sits in, that would push it into another bracket. So by keeping it below that mark, it is making it more accessible for people. So with all the numbers and information out the way, it is about time we get stuck in with this machine. Now, usually I'll review something straight out of the box without any upgrades. But as I've covered a 300-watt spindle before, I would just be repeating the same test, and I know what it is going to be capable of. So we're going to skip ahead a couple of steps, and instead we're going to drop a Makita router in it and start to play with that instead. Now one of the first tasks I've got to get done is produce a spoil board for this, make sure it is all level and trammed in, and then we can start to produce some interesting projects and really put this machine through its paces. So as just mentioned, the first thing I wanted to do was chuck in a Makita router, get that in place, and then also fit a spoil board and make sure all that is surfaced as well to ensure everything is level when machining. Next, I did some backlash testing to confirm the accuracy of this machine, and they all came in within 1 or 2 hundredths of a millimeter, which is super accurate. Next, I stained a piece of pine furniture board in ebony, installed a 90-degree V-bit from Amana, and started to cut some curves within the wood. I then continued to cut some more curves, and continued further again to still do even more curves. This was cutting at 4 millimeters deep at a pass rate of 1800 millimeters per minute. So pretty deep and pretty fast, and getting some very clean results. The outcome was really nice after I applied a nice gloss finish to it. Next, I thought let's do something that requires a bit of assembly. So I jumped over into Carveco, created these shapes on a layout, set the parameters for my toolpath and generated the G code. Then took this back over to the machine, and in 21mm thick birch plywood, I started to carve out these shapes. Now this was a compression bit cutting at 6mm deep at 1500mm per minute. Now it was doing this super smooth, so I could have gone deeper, I could have gone faster, just to show how powerful this machine really is. To cut these out took hardly any time at all, and as you can see, the cuts are super clean. And because of the slightly awkward setup in the workshop at the moment, I took the opportunity to use UGS pendant feature to control everything from the mobile phone, including sending the job and starting it all without needing to be at the PC. Once all the bits were cut out, it was time to do some sanding and cleaning up of them, and then begin the massive task of assembling and gluing this all together. Once it was finished, the effect was pretty good and I was pretty happy with the way it came out, and I'll show you shortly. But whilst doing this, I decided I wanted a way to brand the actual pieces of work I was making. So I dropped a piece of brass onto the machine and began to surface it. This was at 0.4mm deep per pass at a rate of 1200mm, and as we can see, it is easily machining through it. Once the surfacing was done and everything was perfectly flat, it was time to start the rough cut for the branding iron. And again, as you can see, it is machining through this very easily. With the roughing completed, it was time to drop a 30-degree V-bit in and start adding some detail to this branding iron. Sadly, the tip did break, or it wore down, and it didn't quite get the smooth surface on the bottom that I wanted. This is not as a result of the machine, this was the cheap bit that was being used, and had I used a better branded bit, I would have got a smoother surface on that bottom, other than what we can see here, these little ridges going on. And just to indicate how much the bit had broken or wore down, here we can see the difference between a new and old one. But it doesn't stop the effect of the branding iron, so we applied some heat and we did a test with a piece of pine just to see how it came out. And it came out pretty well, but those eagle-eyed viewers will have spotted one major flaw. I forgot to flip the branding iron over, so this is the actual way that it came out. Rookie mistake, but I will always hold my hand up to any mistakes that I make. So even though I made a mistake and the branding iron was the wrong way, I was actually really impressed with the machining job it did and the accuracy of it. So I continued to finish off the lamp and put it in the front room, and it came out really nice, giving off enough ambient light to be really useful, but such a cool and original design. I also mounted the piece of artwork in the same room to complement each other. Both of them came out really clean, and the turnaround time was actually really impressive with how fast the machine was able to go. So I wanted to keep this a project-based review, but I couldn't resist, so I dropped the compression bit back in and worked with the pine board from earlier on. Now this is doing at 1200mm per minute at 6mm depth per pass, and it goes up 1mm each time, and I kept increasing it and it kept handling it. So I kept going all the way through to 15mm deep, and it was still cutting easy. So I decided to go further. The board's only 18.5mm deep, so just kept going 1mm at a time. At 18.5mm, you can see the chatter in the footage, but ultimately it cut through the board in one single pass. How impressive is that? So after doing a couple of tests and a few projects with this machine, it's time to put my thoughts out there on what I actually think about it. And as usual, I'm going to start with the things I think could be improved. And actually there is only one. Now the connecting beam of the Y-axis that runs underneath the bed, this is about 75mm deep. And although it is quite thick and chunky, because of how cranked back the X and Z assembly is, I think it's putting too much pressure on it. I deliberately did some very sharp jerky movements with the CNC machine, as I say, to really push it. And I did notice a fraction wobble in it. And that would, to me, that is down to how thin that plate is. I think if it was maybe 100mm deep, coming back towards the back of the X-axis, it would just give it that extra support. As I say, I was really pushing it, but that is the whole point of doing this review, is to find the areas that Sainsmart could improve on. Now, everything else, well, really, there's a couple of cosmetic things that it could have done slightly different. So, for example, is where the limit switches are, this wiring could have possibly been tidied up a little bit better. Given how sleek everything else is and the fact they've hidden all the mechanisms, just tidying up the wires on these limit switches would have just been that nice little touch that made it much cleaner. But other than that, everything else is really positive. Obviously, we've already been through how solid the frame is. We've seen that this can machine wood quite deep, it can machine metal, and I didn't really push the metal either. This can do so much more. Obviously, straight out of the box, it's nice and easy for a user just to drop a Makita or other router in. But if you are going to treat this as your workhorse, definitely consider something like a 1.5 or 2.2 spindle to drop in there, because it's just going to breeze through pretty much any material you expect, especially with these powerful stepper motors. The bed itself, because of how thick the aluminium is underneath it, there is hardly any deflection in that. There's a tiny bit right in the center of the bed if you put enough weight on it, but to be honest, there shouldn't be that much pressure being applied to it anyway. If there is, you're probably doing something wrong. Now, I've already touched on the fact I love the fact that all the mechanisms are hidden. It just makes this such a clean machine. You have still got access here and there to, apply lubricant and do a bit of maintenance. Obviously, you've got to take the middle one out to get to the Y-axis, but again, that's not too difficult. It's literally 10 seconds to take a couple of bolts out. Now, do I wish Sainsmart had have made this a 60/60 and not a 60/50? Yes, I do, but that's purely because I've now got to decide, do I want to keep this one or do I want to keep the one behind me? I want to cover that on a future episode where I do a bit of a comparison between some of the larger machines that I ever actually got. But overall, for the cost of this machine, it really is good value for money. Not only do you get size, but you also get power. And obviously those combined, well, you're going to be able to produce lots of pieces that you can sell, make profit with, which ultimately is the goal for most people when buying these machines. Now, if you are interested in this machine, please do consider the affiliate links in the description area below. They do not cost you any extra money, but I may get a tiny little bit back, which ultimately helps me to keep doing these reviews and keep making tutorials. Now, that is everything for today's episode. If you do buy one of these, please let me know your feedback in the comments section down below. Thank you very much for watching. Final thanks as always goes to my patrons. If you want to get involved for one-to-one help, early access to videos and giveaways, then check out those links in the description area as well. That is everything for today, and I will see you all on the next episode.